the House today, right? Firstly, on whether it's necessarily a legal obligation for countries to help others by housing refugees. Secondly, we will discuss the idea of financial constraints brought about by their side. And finally, on like some trickle-down effects, some legal precedences that their side tried to create. So firstly, on whether there's necessarily a legal obligation. Now, right from the get-go, their side's been telling us that, well, there's some international law to house refugees, right? Why must we actually pay them to do so? Our side's been very clear on this, right? There's no international law to do so, right? Like countries like Australia rejecting Rohingyas doesn't mean to say that the Australian Prime Minister should be prosecuted for crimes like an International Court of Justice. Their side never really came back to us. But furthermore, their side never actually argued as to why necessarily the status quo countries have rights like to its citizens first. They largely depend on things like circumstances and the context. That's why we don't compel countries to do these kinds of things. It falls into the category of things which are good to do, but not necessarily morally obligatory. Because that kind of means that the rights of the citizens tends to go first towards these governments. But secondly, outside also falls the argument that countries don't actually care, right? Even if you accept the argument that international law is so important, international law also applies to things like invasions, right? But it didn't stop like Russia from invading Crimea and trying to justify it by saying Russians there. There's another example of why international law in the status quo is consistently getting flouted, even if you accept that to be the case, and there's like won't be able to do so. Later they tried telling us, well, you know what guys, we're going to have punitive measures, right? We're going to arrest the leader. Somewhat ludicrous. We don't think that this is actually effective and very hard to justify. We can't actually justify arresting Assad, right? Going in, militarily intervening, and getting him out, even though he committed like huge human rights abuses against his people. We find it very difficult for their side to justify arrest of leaders, particularly those in Western liberal democracies. So we don't think that their side's policy is able to do so. Then we question them, who is this supreme moral authority that has these rights to arrest these individuals? They tried telling some things like the ICC, right, in the second speaker. The ICC can't even prosecute African dictators, right, like Laurent Gbagbo and like those dictators that have been doing war crimes. We don't think that ICC is necessarily effective here. In any case, their side never justified a very clear track record of the ICC being able to prosecute these individuals. So you don't really think that their side actually works here. But let's note that their side is using punitive measures, right? Which means that their side is actually for incentives, right? Their side is not against incentives, they're just using negative incentives, where our side is a positive incentive of cancelling debt amounts. It's a principal concession on their side when they tell us, no, you shouldn't actually incentivize to do so. Because on their side, they're still using punitive measures. Moving on, they try telling us that, well, these countries should do so if they can, neglecting the incredible argument that actually definitions of what you can and cannot do vary in status quo, right? Like countries like China, which is like the most powerful economy in the world, may not be able to house huge amounts of refugees because of the very reason it's densely populated, right? So their side never really gave us the criteria of what it means for countries being able to do so. So you don't think that their side actually worked out on this. But even if you accept the argument on the idea of if you accept their side's argument that necessarily countries can cite some problems, we think that countries should just use this as a reason and cite some problems and use it to justify not actually giving aid. So under their paradigm, countries should still not give aid under their paradigm. No thank you. Moving on, we talked about environmental refugees as well. Right? Environmental refugees are necessarily in the motion as well. And that's like, the only thing that they said was that, well, environmental refugees isn't really part of the motion, and their rights are not necessarily breached by any dictator. We would like to stress that they are called refugees for a reason, right? They're called refugees because they need a place to have refuge. They need a place for home, and they need certain rights that are impinged at the point their islands are sinking. So we do owe a very equal amounts of right to these individuals as well. Calling them not a natural byproduct does no way forgo your own responsibility to them as it is to anyone else. But before I move on, yes sir.
Your case seems to centralize upon the idea that it is ineffective. Just because it is hard to get people, just because it's hard to punish people, doesn't mean we should let them go off scot-free. We need to deal with that, other than asserting that it's ineffective.
Firstly, why do we need to punish them anyway, right? When we have monetary incentives on our side of the house, which look perfectly fine. Let's know that their side never really challenged our policy, which is what an opposition should do, right? We don't think that their side actually arrested our policy, because our policy is like so effective at creating kind of monetary incentives as well. We justify a lot of times, right, that these countries need the money, need to cancel their debts, therefore they would do so. Their side never came back to why this incentive structure isn't present. So moving on. Secondly, let's look at the idea of financial constraints. They said that money doesn't come from anywhere, right? And therefore money would, and therefore like housing such refugees would be supplied by non-profit organizations. Firstly, that's like non-mutually exclusive, right? We have equally non-profit organizations on our side as well. But secondly, money doesn't come from anywhere. That's true. They come from the countries in question, right? They come from the countries in question that actually have the money to house those refugees in the very first place. So we don't see how their side is actually working out here, right? All we're doing is that we are cancelling sections of their debt because of the fact they are bearing the cost of housing those refugees. Those refugees, they have nowhere else to go, then they need some place to do, and that's why we're creating an incentive for them to do so. But thirdly, we would like to argue on the efficacy of non-profit organizations. Because housing refugees isn't so easy, right? You need huge amounts of technical expertise, right? You need huge amounts of support groups, right? And we don't think a non-profit organization, precisely because they're non-profit, have the kind of incentive structure that their side creates to be able to house such refugees. So even if we accept the very strained counter policy given to the second speaker, we don't really think it works out on their side. Secondly, they tried giving us very nebulous claim on misappropriation, saying that somehow such money will go anywhere. A very easy response to this is checks and balances, right? Like in the status quo, when we give aid, you don't necessarily have to give aid which are untied. You can equally tie aid to certain conditions which are met. You can send observers there and showing like using receipts to ensure that these things are okay. Let's note that the other side didn't challenge observers in our policy. This tends to mean that under our paradigm, observers will still go to that place and therefore misappropriation won't occur as they pay. Finally, on the idea of trickle-down effectives, right? They try telling us that, well, we are paying countries not to do so. They're actually like legitimizing the governments to carry out such things. But at this debate, they never once came back to us on how we are like legitimizing them, right? Like there's no link here. All we are doing is helping the refugees from those places, right? Like let's say in the Syrian crisis, for instance, all we're doing is housing those refugees from the area. We're not legitimizing the Assad regime anyway. In any case, we think that housing refugees is a good thing as well, right? We also delegitimize the process. Why? Because it's only when refugees like have enough like food, have enough rights, have enough housing, that they're able to regroup together and like cement the kind of objective that they want to do, right? They want to say, I'm against Assad because of this reason. That's when we see these refugees like regrouping together and being far more able to fight for the rights that they have, the rights that they want to deserve after they're able to have their basic needs met. But before I move on, yes sir.
We don't think there's an incentive on the part of the IMF to have vested interest into reducing the kind of like offset the cost for these countries.
Firstly, that is false, right? Also, it's been very clear this. We said in our very first speaker that IMF and World Bank have huge incentives at doing so, right? These countries, these institutions currently are sort of like international cooperation, right? Whereby we really set our policy, they'll be working with the United Nations to ameliorate suffering. And anyway, that's historically false as well. When we've seen like World Banks giving like stimulus package to countries, they also have like huge financial needs. Because you know that if there's a refugee crisis there, and there's like a lot of like surplus labor that's not actually using much, we rather like channel them and ameliorate the level of suffering. So firstly, they like completely didn't challenge our policy, and secondly, we don't think it's actually true. This from a very historical perspective. Finally, they said that well, if such laws are ineffective, it doesn't mean that they should necessarily be removed. Our very first response to this, there's no such law, and secondly, we think that it's just like there's no such law, that there's no such moral obligation met out on these countries. So for a few reasons, like outside explain this debate, firstly, we don't think it's a legal obligation, right? It falls under things that countries can do, but they don't actually need to do so, that's why you don't prosecute them. Secondly, there's no financial constraint, like we have observers on our policy, entirely unchallenged by their side. And finally, trickle-down effects, well, it's not a legal precedent because it's not an obligation in the very first place. So for all these reasons, we're very proud to stand on the sidebar.